Right, Dolores, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me tonight. Really looking forward to our conversation and really excited to talk about some of the things that you've already shared with me. I think there's a lot to explore on that front, especially when it comes to the idea of consciousness. That's always a complex topic for many people, and I think it's something that we all tend to navigate in different ways. But before we go down that path, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, what's brought you here, and what's some of the work
Sure.
you're doing in this world.
All right. Thank you, Furkhan. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, be interviewed by
Mhm.
you, but also to speak to your audience. My name's Dolores Fazzino. I have a doctorate in nursing practice. I'm a nurse practitioner, a medical intuitive, and an energy whisperer. And what that means is that I'm very well versed in reading energy. People's thoughts, when they start talking, it's like I get dialed in and I could sense what is happening underneath the iceberg, okay? Because what
Mhm.
we see is the physical, and that's the tip of the iceberg, but energetically, what I'm able to decipher is what's going on underneath that iceberg, like maybe your beliefs, your thoughts, whether or not you're connected to your body, whether or not you're connected to your higher self, whether or not you are connected, period.
Mhm.
So, and we know right now in humanity's evolution, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. And I think we are all living through it. And I think it's really kicked things up a notch for a lot of people where we are getting triggered. Okay. And I
Mhm.
think what happens is when we get triggered, all the stuff that's underneath the surface of the iceberg is starting to percolate and want to come up to the surface so it could be
Mhm.
dealt with, because it's
Mhm.
usually never the trigger point itself. That's just the gateway to get into the deeper work that needs to be done to heal all of that. So that's
Mhm.
what I do. I've been in the healthcare industry for well over 45 years. My background has been in surgery of all places, but I bridge the physical with the spiritual and the invisible with the visible. And
Mhm.
as we know, Furkan, we've talked about this before, is like everything is energy. And I think what I want to say to the audience is that if you're able to see us, we're a denser form of energy, but we're still energy.
Mhm.
It's what we can't see, which is like more radio wave ish, like our thoughts, our beliefs, our emotions, whether or not we experience them, and everything else that I had talked about earlier when I introduced myself. These are all energy. And it's like
Mhm.
all these little waves back and forth going. And sometimes you could feel it, sometimes you can't. Just because you can't feel it or see it doesn't mean it does not exist. It
Mhm.
is there and it's actually running the show. So
Yeah.
that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And we're in an interesting time in the evolution of our earth and just being here in this moment because a lot is happening on the external.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that and focusing on the energy aspect, which is something I do want to come back to. But
Sure.
I am curious because you said you've been in the healthcare industry for over 4 decades, but when did you find yourself being intuitive in terms of picking up on other people's energies or
Well,
maybe what they're going through?
well, you know what? I was born that way. So this was happening in my early childhood. I would feel
Hmm.
things at a much deeper level. It's what we call being an empath, intuitive, or
Hmm.
and highly sensitive person. I was all three of those, and I'm a product of the 1960s. I grew up in the 1960s, and at that time, our parents did not know what to do with us when we were sensitive, and they tried to conform us and put us in a box and keep us neat and tidy. If you even asked some questions, you were because it wasn't. They just didn't know what to do with it. So they just figured if they control it and keep it in a box and under wraps and put it on the shelf, we're fine. Unfortunately, that doesn't work for many of us who are
Yeah.
very sensitive because we're not being heard, seen, valued, respected, or appreciated for who we are and our talents and our gifts that we have.
Hmm.
And it's as if we've been trying to be conformed into what society feels is the right thing to do. Who made
Yeah.
that rule up? But that's what has happened. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were always aware of something as a child, When were you able to put it all together and realize that this is something you can actually use and help people, whether they're looking for it or not?
I think maybe I need to share the story on how I got into this
Yeah.
because, believe it or not, I was on a trajectory to become a concert clarinetist. And in the
Mm,
11th hour, my junior year, I decided to change career pathways and go into healthcare after I witnessed a miraculous healing of my father's chronic health condition with non-traditional modalities. Okay,
mm,
so this goes between 1966 and 1976. So just to give a little bit of history that are
mhm,
these pieces are very essential to know. I grew up in a household where we weren't allowed to feel. And when you have somebody who's highly sensitive and intuitive and empathic, it's like you feel things very deeply. And my mom's MO for this or coping mechanism was ignore it, it'll go away. So,
mhm,
if you're one of those people, if you ignore this stuff, it just grows bigger. So I would tell
mhm,
my mom it's growing bigger. So for me, channeling that into music was how I was able to cope. Now, in tandem with that, I believe I was in second grade. My dad threw his back out and needed to have back surgery back in the 1960s. And he had it. And unfortunately, he got a hospital acquired infection and pretty much put him on his deathbed for after 2 months. He did
mhm,
survive that. Yet when he came home, he looked like a walking corpse. And I was just like mortified because, there's this whole thing too that when there was this whole belief that when children are young, they can't handle the truth of what's going on, which is
mhm,
a misnomer because I think it does more harm for the child because they start making up stories in their mind. And I knew things were bad, but I didn't realize how bad they were until I got to witness my father. So he
mhm,
did survive that, but there was about 4 years from 66 to 70. He was fine. And then it seemed like it was every year and a half that all of a sudden, if his immune system got compromised, this whole sequela of events would reappear, and he would have to go in the hospital, have major surgery because he was growing abscesses throughout his abdominal cavity, and he was
mhm,
what we call obstructing. And he would be on his deathbed, be in the hospital for about 2 months, and come home. This not only happened once, it happened 4 times between 1970 and 1975. The last episode of that, okay, and I've got to do this little segue here too.
mhm,
It's just, okay, so here you are, a teenager, growing up, childhood, okay? And your life is like an emotional roller coaster because every year and a half, this is happening, and you don't know if your father's going to make it out alive or not. It was just highly stressful. So I really got proficient at channeling my emotion into music because we weren't allowed to feel. Okay, so I'm setting up the whole scenario here.
yeah, yeah,
So, what happened next was that the last time that this happened, my mom was at her wits' end because she felt as if Western medicine had failed her, which they did. But also in 1975 was the first time that the CAT scanner came onto the horizon as a new diagnostic tool. And so they put my dad underneath the CAT scanner and they found that where he had his original surgery in 1966, his back surgery, there was that was where everything was stemming from. And it was whenever his immune system got compromised, it would seed and then it would raise holy hell in a handbasket.
mhm,
So their solution at that time was that he was going to need another back surgery, which they call a spinal fusion, which in 1975 was in its neophyte stages of development. It was just a new procedure that they were just starting to do. It came with very high risks. It came with the risk that you could be paralyzed, you could die, or maybe you'd get better, or maybe you would get worse. And my mom was not into this at all. And she was scared. She really was,
mhm,
bless her heart. And she ended up started doing some reading. Now, you have to realize this is 1976. It's not 1990 or 2020. We
mhm,
didn't have computers, WebMD, or anything. We had the National Enquirer. Okay, so that was like the
mhm,
newspaper of the day where everybody got the gossip and everything else. But
Right.
what had been happening was that they were writing, she came across an article that was written up about a man who was I want to say, a minister from Carroll, Michigan. He had the gift of laying on of hands, okay, energy work. And he was being featured because he was able to assist his brother from healing from leukemia. And back in 1975, that was considered quackery. And this man had been doing it for 25 years prior with some success. My
Mm.
mom was all over this butter on bread. My dad, not so much, because my dad's only if the surgeon says it's okay. And so
Mm.
my mom said, okay. They were in the hospital at the time. So she marched out of my dad's room to the nurse's station where the surgeon was actually sitting there, and she made an announcement to the surgeon. I'm thinking about having a spiritual healer come in to assist my husband with his health condition. Would that be okay? Surgeon's writing, looking down, looking up at her, and doesn't miss a beat and says, sure, that would be fine. So my mom thought, okay, I got the blessing. I'm going back, sharing this with my husband. She did not. And my dad agreed to have the healer come in. And so she decided that she was going to go back out to the desk and share that news with the surgeon. And the only thing is, this is where I believe there was a God moment, because things
Mhm.
sometimes get set up behind the scenes. Okay. When she
Mhm.
approached the surgeon and shared the same information that she had just relayed from my dad, and she said to the surgeon, my husband agreed to have the spiritual healer in. The surgeon looked up at her and said, dropped a pen. What are you talking about? I never agreed to this. So sometimes things work in mysterious ways. Of course, my mother didn't tell my dad that piece. And a month later, Reverend Holmes came from Carroll, Michigan to our home in Connecticut. And my siblings were there. I'm one of four. My father and mother and my two grandmothers were there. And
Mhm.
Reverend Holmes was this really very soft spoken, very humble human being. And he noticed that as my dad was sitting down, that one of his legs was shorter than the other. I don't know how he knew this. We all knew this. This was never disclosed to him. My dad did wear a lift in his shoes, but his shoes were nowhere inside. He was barefoot. So he asked my father to put both his legs up, and sure enough, one of them had a 1 inch gap from the other. So there was one, it was like 1 inch shorter than the other. And he said to my father to put his legs down. And then he started praying over my father, and he touched my father's belly and solar plexus and the top of his head, his crown chakra, and said some prayers. And about 3 minutes went by. He asked my father to put both his feet up, and they were both the same length. Now, my father, who is the biggest skeptic, needed to witness that something was actually happening
Mm.
so that he could believe that he could be healed, basically. Me, my life changed in that moment forever. I knew that it was no longer my mission to go into become a concert clarinetist, but to go into healthcare to bridge that world with what we could see
Mhm.
and the invisible with the visible. Now,
Mhm.
what had happened after that, my dad was wailing like a baby, like I've never witnessed, because he needed some aspect of knowing that something was happening, and he got that. More prayers and energy work were said over my father, and then he was instructed to go lie down, which he did, and he slept for over 24 hours, which is not unusual. When massive energy work is being done on somebody, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, if you want to call it that. It's like getting a huge energetic download. And the only analogy I could give it is, you know how we get a new program in our computer and then we
Mhm.
need to shut it down or reboot it? Same idea. You're getting a big download of energetic healing, and you need to lie down to process and integrate. So it's not
Mhm.
unusual for people to sleep that long. Now, a
Yeah.
month later, he went back to the same CAT scanner. There was no evidence of the infection, of where it had been stemming from. He never had to have that surgery that we were all fearful about. And he never had to revisit that set of problems again in his lifetime. And he passed away about 10 years ago at the age of 80. So that's how I got started in
Yeah.
this. And so it's
Yeah.
been interesting because back in the 70s, 80s, this was like big skeptic stuff and quackery, but I knew that there was more to this than not. And I think
Mm-hmm.
as time has progressed, it's being more and more embraced today, more so than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that big shift started happening probably around 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where people were starting to realize that there's more going on than what we could see. And I'm just grateful to have witnessed this and have been part of this journey. Has it been a challenge? You betcha it has,
Mm-hmm.
because you know what you know. And when you're in a world where everything thrives on evidence based, which is a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of BS, that's the Kool Aid that they drink. That
Mm-hmm.
there's things that we know are truths, but we don't have that capability to measure it yet because we don't have the technology.
Right.
So, how dare us say that this isn't true because we can't prove it?
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Yeah.
like that's a huge, huge
Mm-hmm.
problem. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
so
Well,
that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
no, I appreciate you sharing that story. So that definitely gives us some context around what allowed you to find this space for yourself and obviously do this work. Now, one of the things you touched on is triggers. And I think triggers are great because they're informative. They're telling us, uh, they can be our teachers if we looked at it from that perspective or even reframed it because the triggers show us where we need to work or where we need to put
Absolutely.
our emphasis. Now, the
Absolutely.
other thing you touched on was in society right now, it's very interesting based on the evolution of what we're seeing within our species. But you see a lot of people getting triggered, whether it's hearing the truth or being told something that they don't necessarily agree with. And unfortunately, because people get triggered, they tend to project it out. What are
Yes.
your thoughts around that? And what are you noticing in terms of that? Or do you even agree with that sentiment?
It's interesting because I'm a firm believer that I trust me, I've been working on triggering stuff for the last my whole entire life. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because
Mm-hmm.
I I find it so necessary for me to continually work on myself because here I am assisting other people and I want to be genuine and authentic and I want to be doing the work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I when you're living through it and you've gone through it, you can actually better assist people. That's my philosophy because it's just like you have firsthand experience of that. Now, yes, there's a lot of things happening in our world right now. I believe that the triggers are really a gift, and I'll tell you why. Because many of us are in react mode, okay? Meaning that we get triggered and we just go off without thinking. It's just like automatic
Mm-hmm.
react. And when we are reacting like that, there's this game at the fair called whack a mole. Which one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You could see it. It's the bolt comes up, whack, whack, whack with a hammer. And that's what I call reactive
Mm-hmm.
response. When you're getting triggered, I feel that it's truly a gift because it's an opportunity to go deep within yourself to find out, ask the question, I'm getting triggered. Why is that? Because what you're being triggered, it's like the tip of the iceberg. It's not really what the real issue is, but it's setting you off. And our natural tendency is to make that discomfort go away, right?
Mm-hmm.
We also are in a society where we do a lot of judging and criticizing. I think we've seen that more so today than ever. And we need to take it a step further. What on the outside is judging and criticizing,
Mm-hmm.
it all starts here. So
Right.
we are judging and criticizing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I find what's helpful is to really focus on self compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When we give ourselves the gift of self compassion, there's nothing to figure out. It's just saying a mantra, the word self compassion, especially if you're feeling triggered, because what it does, self compassion, your trigger point is here energetically, the self compassion is vibrating higher.
Yes.
When you start putting a higher vibration in the area of where there's a lower vibration, you're naturally going to raise this up
Mm-hmm.
by just focusing. And it's not trying to figure out what self-compassion, just say the word as a mantra, self-compassion. About a week or so ago, I was sitting in meditation, and I'm going through my stuff right now. And what came through for me, which I think is very telling, was this. The mantra that came through is love and self-compassion and trust and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a beautiful little phrase that I invite people to utilize that as well, because we're in a period of time where it's about having a lot of blind faith and trust, because how we think we need to figure it out, it's a big cosmic joke. There's something even bigger going on than what we can even identify
Mm-hmm.
or compare it to. So it's really about looking at those triggers that you're being triggered, because it's an opportunity for you to exercise self-compassion for yourself. Because once you start shifting this vessel, it's going to reflect out, and you're going to be seeing possibly less of the triggers. That'll be the barometer of what's happening out here as to what you need to do within yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I appreciate that too, and I agree with you. And that was one of the things we talked about also
Yeah.
is being less judgmental and being more on the compassionate side, because that's how, to your point, you raise your vibration. Now, one of the things I've learned, and it's a lot from the work of David Hawkins that I've familiarized with myself with,
Mm-hmm.
and often it's easy to get cynical or just have this doubt that, okay, even if I were to raise my vibration or have some of these higher order energy states and have the focus on compassion and love, but the rest of the world is suffering and this and that. But one of the things I really appreciate is like you can have a significant impact by just focusing on yourself. That, to your point, you could start raising the vibration of things around you and others around you, and it doesn't take a whole lot. And that's why I think there's a sense of optimism around there, that you can focus on yourself and do not only heal yourself, but have a tremendous impact on those around you as well because of your own vibrational energy.
And Furkhan, that is so spot on true, because,
Mm-hmm.
and some people feel, oh, you know what, it's out there that it's
Mm-hmm.
happening. No, what you're seeing out there is a reflection of what's going on in here. It's up to us individually, and working on self is not selfish, it's a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely necessary for where we're going in the
Mm-hmm.
future. We have to
Yeah.
clean up our own little container here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody's
I was,
going to do it for us.
yeah.
Yes, you could project it out, but and I don't think anybody wants to take that on as their
Mm-hmm.
own. And that's where the other thing comes on, because you spoke a little bit about a lot of projection. When
Mm-hmm.
you are in a world where people are not mindful or awake, because I think there's three phases of humanity, or three groups. There's those that are awake, those that are awakening, and those that are still asleep. So what I mean by that is like the ones that have woken, they've been working on their path and know these things. The ones that are waking up are the ones that life had been going really well for them, and then all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from underneath them. Maybe they lose their job, something changes, that it's almost, I'm gonna say, it's like their spiritual awakening. They're realizing
Mm-hmm.
that the external is no longer working for them, and it's a call to come into the internal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then there's
Yeah.
other people that are just going to be totally oblivious. And maybe that's what they need to do in this
Mm-hmm.
lifetime for whatever lessons they need to learn. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel that every time that there's a big upheaval in society, like right now, there's a lot going on. A lot of people are waking up.
Mm-hmm.
COVID was another booster where a
Yeah.
lot of people woke up.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, 9/11, 23 years ago, that was another flux of people waking up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like these mass, I'm going to call them eruptions, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it that,
Yeah.
but it's just like they're there for whatever reason, and it's to allow people to wake up, to raise their frequency, and to
Mm-hmm.
realize that, okay, My life isn't about what's out here, it's more about what's going on inside.
Hmm.
Because when you're able to come within yourself, you could create more certainty in your life than if you reflected out here to look for your certainty because it's non existent.
Yes. No, I agree with you. And I constantly remind myself that I have to get my house in order first. But that's very true. And the other piece you touched on earlier was being able to tune into other people's energies. And you hear statements like, oh, I like this person's energy. But I don't know if people truly appreciate what they mean when they say that, because there's something about that person that they find appealing or they're attracted to, but there's a deeper sense there. And I think we've touched on it from the vibrational frequency side, but that often comes through as how the individual presents themselves, whether they're or not they're grounded or content, right? So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to remember everywhere you go, here you are.
mhm,
Right?
yeah,
So I laugh at this. We've all probably had people in our lives that are just so miserable that they think, oh, if the job is really terrible, I just need another job. They change jobs and the same
mhm,
old baloney's happening. And then they want another job or they move someplace else and it's happening there.
yeah,
What's the common denominator?
yes,
So everywhere you are, here you are, really. So if you're not liking what you're experiencing, instead of reacting to it, just maybe be curious about it. It's like, why is that so? And just, it's being more responsive versus reactive. Okay. It's about more of a mindful approach versus a trying to make something happen approach.
mhm, yes,
So it's about being curious with that. And I always invite people to experiment with it because unless you do it for you, you could read every book on the shelf. Unless you put it into practice, you're never going to have the experience. Make it into bite sized pieces where people will just experiment with that. We'll see what happens when you do this and get back to me or whatever.
mhm,
Because when they learn how to do it and for themselves and make it their own, it's a whole different experience for them.
yes,
And a lot of times it's, oh my God, this really has some merit to it.
mhm,
So, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's the again, we're in a very interesting time where we're being told and almost being encouraged to seek that happiness outside of ourselves. And it's through whatever achievements you can or material acquisitions you can gain, whatever that may be. But I think a lot of people after a while start realizing that no, I still feel the same because I'm not looking inward. I'm not finding that sense of contentment within. And to your point, the external is just fleeting, right? It's a never
Oh,
ending
yeah.
pursuit.
Oh, it is. And you're absolutely right. They might have some wins short term happiness, but it's never going to be the long term stuff.
Hmm.
Because
Yes.
it's unsustainable because you're
Hmm.
missing a real strong component of what it really is. It's almost giving their sovereign power to something outside of themselves versus coming within and embracing all of those delicious little gifts that are them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Now, a lot of the times when you're starting to feel that shift within yourself and you're doing a lot of that work, and as we've talked about, you start raising your energy, that can be a lonely process because then you start recognizing that maybe the people you've surrounded yourself with or the people that you thought were your friends are not serving you as they used to. That can be a very lonely process for people. What are your thoughts around that? What do you recommend when people are going through that experience or journey?
Wow, that could be really challenging for some
Hmm.
people. I'm a firm believer, and I know people probably have heard this saying before, people are in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Okay.
Hmm.
So, the gone are the days where people stay in marriages their whole entire life because it's like you have needed to learn a certain thing and you guys stopped growing together and you learned whatever and it's time to go your separate ways. You've learned the lessons, and it's not that you're a bad person or whatever. It's just
Mhm.
that it is no longer the right energetic fit or alignment. And
Mhm.
that's not a good thing, bad thing. It's just what it is. In our lifetimes, things have happened so quickly and rapidly. Something that would have taken a whole lifetime, if you lived around the 1900s, your whole lifetime would take you a whole lifetime to work through an issue. Now things have been so accelerated. We've gone from this plateau to like this. Everything's happening all at once and quickly. So you're learning lessons quickly and burning through your karma or whatever that is
Mhm.
to gain the wisdom that you're supposed to gain. So, yes, when you start changing and growing, your energy is going to change. And if you're hanging out with people who were here when you were here, but you're up here, they're no longer an energetic alignment. And it's not
Mhm.
a bad thing, a good thing. It's just what it is. Your
Right.
frequency and vibration is raising. When these things fall away, it leaves a void for whatever's supposed to be coming in, or what is already there for you. You're tapping into that.
Yes.
I call it getting upgraded
Mhm. Yeah.
because you
Well,
are.
yeah. And I think there's an aspect of humility and gratitude that goes with that too, because I think people then often will fall into, and like you said, it's not a bad thing that perhaps you don't feel that energetic alignment with others. And you may say, okay, I've upgraded and they haven't, because that can also have a somewhat of a
Yeah.
condescending aspect to it. But I
Yeah.
think
Yeah. Yeah.
you can avoid that by just being grateful and humble that you've been able to recognize certain things.
Yeah.
And as you touched on earlier, have compassion for others and try to bring them along if they're open to it. And not
Right.
everyone is at a given time, everyone's on their own individual journey. Now, there's this other piece that you and I've chatted about with being conscious to what's coming up. And there's a something I read a while ago. So it's not, I'm not going to take any credit for it, but it's the universe whispers until it screams.
Oh my
So
God. Yes.
so you are, when you're on this journey and it's your time to become aware of working through some things, you're going to constantly get reminders and messages. And very similar to that saying, initially they'll be like whispers until the point it gets to screams. And if you still don't pay attention, then I don't know what
It'll be a
happens.
showstopper.
Yeah. But how can people start paying attention to those whispers? And sometimes you have to wait till it's a scream and then you're like, okay, I really need to focus on this or work through this. But
Yeah.
yeah, what can people do as these things are coming to their conscious awareness?
I feel that one of the best things people could do is just focus on a mindful activity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And let's talk about mindful activity. It could be as formal as doing meditation, sitting in lotus position, or going out in the yard and watering your yard. For me, my meditation is watering my potted plants. That I have potted plants palooza in my backyard. So it's like it's a Zen moment because it's you're there, you're watering it, and you're in the moment. So you lose track of time. I want to say mindful activities equate to losing all sense of time and place. And we've all had those instances like you get your nose in a book and you're reading and hours go by, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a mindful activity. It could be cooking, it could be driving in a car going on a road trip. Mindful activity is anything that allows you to lose all sense of time and place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you like to run, maybe that's your mindful activity.
Right.
In our grandparents' generation, great grandparents, they used to knit and tat. This is like in the 1800s, 1900s. That was
Yes.
their mindful activity. And it was nice to witness an evolution or a return of that, where people are starting to craft and stuff like that. That's a mindful activity. When you're doing a mindful activity, you're in your body, believe it or not. You're in the present moment.
Yes.
Okay. When you're in the present moment, that's where you get to hear those whispers of the universe saying, hey, Furkhan, pay attention to this. And it might be a subtle whisper,
Mm-hmm.
but then you're going to be able to hear it. So
Mm-hmm.
hopefully you will get the wisdom that is being given to you without needing to get the proverbial 2x4 across the face, right?
Yeah. And sometimes you need that right in your
You do.
face
You
to
do.
realize that, okay, I've been given enough opportunities and it's time to
Yeah.
whatever it is, figure it out. And I think the piece around mindfulness, this is one of the things I try to remind people too, because often people by default go to meditation and then they have this image of what meditative practice needs to be. But to your point, it can be anything that brings you to that present state, or a lot of the times we call it flow state, where you are completely like unaware of time and you're
Yep.
just so focused on that activity, and none of those thoughts, those ruminating thoughts, are coming into your head and distracting you. And I think that's a peaceful moment and it's beautiful, but people can find it in many different ways. I know you gave some examples. Sports or even physical activity, like you said, running can be those ways that you can achieve those states. A lot of the times clients I work with enjoy painting and they really experience
Yes.
that present state. So any
Yep.
artistic work can also bring that about. And I
Oh,
know you touched
absolutely.
on
I,
your
I
musical
feel
background.
that, yeah, no, I feel that it's important for people to find that for themselves. What is
Hmm.
their mindful activity? Because you and I might have two different, we're
Hmm.
going to have a different experience of what that is for them. I know for me, like I said, my Zen moment is watering my yard, the pots, but and another Zen moment is going on a road trip. I could get lost for 6 hours driving someplace and it goes by like that
Yeah.
because it's just that's the way it is
Mm.
for me at least.
Yes.
So it's about inviting people to explore that and to find out what is their ground zero place, if you want to call it ground zero, for them, where they could just chill and just be fully present. Because the more time that you're able to spend in that realm, it's like that's going to be your new norm.
Hmm.
Okay. And the
Yes.
outliers are going to be popping out and going into the whirling dervish outside of us with chaos making.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. No, I
Yeah.
appreciate that as well. Dolores, I know we've covered quite a bit of ground, but is there anything else you feel like we haven't touched on that would be of value to the listener, especially around a lot of the stuff we're talking about, whether it's healing, raising your
Mm,
vibrational energy, having compassion for others and yourself?
yeah. Oh, yeah. I think the most important thing is another important thing that maybe needs to be touched on is that
Hmm.
people be aware that they have innate healing abilities within themselves and they could heal from anything. And I feel that so many people have a tendency to give that aspect of their power away to something outside of themselves. It's about learning to trust your instincts in the information that you're getting.
Hmm.
Okay, let me slow down a bit. The information that you're getting, it's like those are the little downloads you get from the universe, like the little taps, but
Hmm.
also that is your intuition as well talking
Yes.
to you. Okay. Learning how to listen to that and trusting the information you're getting, especially around your health and well being.
Hmm.
Our natural tendency, and it's been this way for a long time, people see the white coat and they bow down and they think they have all the answers. Newsflash, they don't. I could
Hmm.
say that. I work in that world. I've been in it
Yeah.
45 years. They don't.
Hmm.
And it's up to us individually to check in. If it feels like it's your truth, great. If not, don't. I invite you not to drink the Kool Aid. If you're not feeling it, don't listen to this.
Right.
Trust your instincts on things because it's so vital right now because you want to make sure you're making the right choices for you, not your spouse, not your kids, not your neighbor, for
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
That's the important thing. What your neighbor might need may be something completely different because her whole scenario is way different than yours.
Hmm.
Even though you might have a similar health condition, how you got to that point and how she got to that point may be two different ways. And that's the key of looking underneath the bottom of the iceberg.
Hmm.
Okay. Yes,
Yes.
the top of it looks the same, but everybody's underneath is way different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's crucial to highlight that because we've been conditioned to believe otherwise, or we often get distracted with so much noise that we don't tend to listen to that inner voice and we shut it off. Or to your point earlier, we tend to feel that it's selfish. And I think you have to reframe the idea that if you're able to take care of yourself and heal and do all that work that's necessary and listen to that inner voice, not only are you being a better version of yourself, others are benefiting from that too. And sometimes you just need to
Absolutely.
reframe that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because let's put it this way, if you don't take care of yourself, nobody else is going to do it, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, you lived in your Taj Mahal your whole entire life, so you know what it can handle and what it can't. And it's about really loving yourself enough to put yourself first.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Dolores, so much
You're so
for this
welcome.
conversation and your insight. I really appreciate it all. And for listeners that want to learn more about your work or find you online, what are some ways they can do that?
Oh, okay. First of all, I have a new program that I'm launching in September. It's called I'm Awake. Now What?
Mm-hmm.
It's for those people who have awakened and really don't have a reference point as to, oh my God, I'm lost. I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is a subscription membership, and we meet once a month, and there's lots of resources on the site. And if you become a member, you have access to that. You also learn some tools and be able to ask questions, and gain some clarity. That's one thing. And you could go to my website, drdoloresfazzino.com, and you'll see a section that says, I'm awake now, what? And
Mm-hmm.
also, I also have a podcast, TV and radio show with Inspired Choices Network, and we broadcast over 350 different platforms, and it's called the Dr. Dolores Show, and we air live every Wednesday at high noon Pacific Standard Time. So that's what's going on in my world
Yeah.
these days. But
No,
that's
that's
enough.
great. I'll put all of that in the show note captions too so people can
Perfect.
check it
Thank you
out.
so much.
But,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was a great one.
Thank you, Furkhan. Appreciate it.